welcome to this Astranti Top 10 Most Likely Unseen Issues for the MCS November 2020 and February 2021 exam sitting. In this video, we're going to go through the top 10 most likely issues, and we're going to talk about why we've chosen these issues, the likely issues that may come up and key points to bring into your exam, as well as some of the relevant theory that you might consider applying. Now, before we begin, I'm just going to explain why I've chosen these issues and how to use them in your exam. So what is the basis for my choices? Well, the first one is what the focus in the pre-scene actually is. Has there been a lot of material that's been mentioned in the pre-scene to do with a particular topic? Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe there hasn't been something that should be mentioned in the pre-scene, and so it might be that that will be some of your unseen material in your actual exam. There is also the degree of importance that is attached to the pre-scene by the examiner. So after each exam, an examiner will write up a report talking about what students did or didn't write enough about. So if there are topics that examiners repeatedly say students don't talk about enough, there's a potential likelihood that it may come up again and the examiners will be looking for you to talk about it in your actual exam. Outside of the pre-scene, there is of course the strategic importance of particular topics to the company. You could look at the importance of a SWOT analysis. What are its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And then what kind of strategic importance do the directors attach to a particular issue? Something that has a genuine impact on the business's strategy and critical success factors is far more likely to come up than something that is completely irrelevant to the company. There is also my own experience. I have written a wide variety of mock exams and seen a wide variety of past papers from CIMA, and so I have a good idea of the kinds of topics that CIMA are likely to test students on. And I also keep an eye out on things that are easy to examine. If a CIMA examiner finds a topic that they can write about that will be easy to assess and assess a wide variety of CIMA topics, then it is more likely that they will write questions on those specific areas. It is not likely that the examiner will try to write a really obscure question that's difficult for them to write and assesses an obscure part of the syllabus. So that's why I've chosen these, but how can you actually use these issues in your exam? First thing is to prepare the key models from the pre-scene information for your exam. So if I'm talking about particular issues and I say you could use Porter's 5 forces or a SWOT analysis, then go back to the pre-scene and prepare your Porter's 5 forces or SWOT analysis. But remember to adapt your models when you receive the unseen information in your exam. Some new points may be raised that you will need to directly address in the exam, and so you must adapt your models accordingly. You should also make sure you sit as many mock exams that cover these issues. For example, Astranti creates mocks based on these key issues that you can use to practice. But you should also sit as many mocks as you can, since it's the best way to prepare for your exam. You get experience writing your answers in the correct style and under time constraints. You should also find any relevant real-life examples. So if you're talking about a particular issue, then go online and find an example that resembles what was happening to the pre-scene company. How did this real-life company overcome a similar problem, or what kind of problems is it currently experiencing? And you can find these sorts of examples in our industry analysis. And in that analysis, we have prepared sample paragraphs that you can use to see what kind of style and how you should use your industry examples in the context of the exam. You should also learn typical key points, and this can be as simple as the advantages and disadvantages. This can be a really good jumping off point for evaluating particular points that may be raised in the unseen material. And finally, be prepared to use models to support your argument, to persuade the examiner that what you are saying is justified and makes strategic and practical sense for your pre-scene company. So that's how you can use this analysis to prepare for your exam. So let's kick things off with the first key issue, which is of course number 10. So our first key issue is ethics. Now, why have we chosen ethics? Well, for starters, ethics is one of the most commonly examined MCS topics. It appears in most MCS variants, and CIMA wants to be seen as testing people on what good ethical conduct is. After all, being accountants, ethics is probably going to be one of the most important topics, one of the most important things that you are capable of being morally right in your actual practice. So as far as specific things in the pre-scene, you'll have to be conscious of the stakeholders. So of course you have your suppliers. Are you sourcing your goods from sustainable sources? health and safety, so the health and safety of your toys to children, you're not using any toxic materials. And then does the business's actual activities match the values that are set out in the business model, in the business strategy? So to start off, the most likely ethical issues that may come up in particular for this company is the environment and sustainability. We know from the pre-scene there are some examples of articles, some news articles that talk about Prybloxx's use of plastic in its packaging. There's also the fact that the toy manufacturer is a heavy user of plastics. So what kind of sustainability policies does it have? From the pre-scene, there apparently aren't any, so this might be something that is raised in your unseen material. You might be given information about Prybloxx's corporate social responsibility. There's also, of course, the safety and the risk of reputation to Prybloxx if its toys are not safe for children, if they have toxic materials on them, and then, of course, as time goes on, the importance of ensuring that your supply chains are sustainable, that you're not sourcing your materials from child labor, can have a serious impact on a business's reputation. So Prybloxx has to be conscious of those factors as well. Looking at some key points to raise then for the company, CIMA, like I said before, wants you to be highly ethical, so you must take the moral high ground. You should never suggest something that would be inherently unethical, something that would compromise your integrity as a CIMA qualified accountant and the sustainable integrity of the business. You should always make a recommendation in this case, a short-term recommendation to deal with a specific issue. So for example, change in safety procedure, maybe if you're seeing problems in the factory. Maybe look at trying to use more sustainable plastics. So we've already got one example in the pre-scene. A short-term measure is the use of cornstarch plastic to allow so that the packaging is actually biodegradable. But then you'll also need to consider how you will avoid these issues in the long term. So do you invest in new equipment or perhaps a new kind of sustainability program? Common examples in the real world is Lego investing massively into wind farms, eventually allowing it quite recently to completely run its factory off of sustainable energy. And then what about the relevant theories? Well, the first one that comes to mind is that you should always act in accordance with CIMA's ethical principles. You should have integrity. You should make sure that you keep information confidential. You should always act professionally. You should always act with objectivity. And then you should also have professional competence and due care. You should make sure you understand your role, you understand your job, and that you are able to carry it out. So a bit of advice then. If you ever have a question on ethics, always use this model as a base for your thought process. And always use the phrase in your head, is it simply the right thing to do? You should always remember to act in accordance with CIMA's ethical principles, always act in an ethical manner, and never, ever try to argue something that is completely unethical and goes against these principles. So that is ethics, a relatively simple but common topic. Let's look at the next one, which is financing. After all, we are accountants, and financing is going to be part of our role. So what is the basis of this choice? Well, there are some key F2 topics. We have equity financing, debt finance, and the weighted average cost of capital. Now, these are all major financing topics at the F2 level, and so there are plenty of opportunities to use this as part of other questions. It's not just a question based solely on financing. You may be asked to work on a project, and so you may need to look for financing. So this topic on financing in general is commonly examined and often part of other topics as well. Since cash will be needed for a variety of new investment projects, so you really have to think about how to raise finance, but also crucially with the weighted average cost of capital, understand how it affects shareholders. So what are some of the likely issues to do with financing more generally? Well, you've got to consider the long-term funding requirements for, say, an acquisition, new products, and organic growth. You've got to make sure that you come to a conclusion on what financing methods will be the most appropriate for some of these options. So what is the appropriate finance for a project? A rights issue, debentures, that is something you have to come to a conclusion on. And then, as I said a moment ago, depending on which finance choice you choose to do, you need to also understand and explain the implications of what this will have on the working average cost of capital. So what are some of the key points that you might like to raise? Well, to start with, we know from the pre-scene that in 2019, Prybloxx had $109 million in cash. But bear in mind, most of this is probably going to be needed for working capital. And if we look at our current liabilities, we can see that they're significantly higher at $318 million. So it has to acquire finance from somewhere to make sure that it can pay off its short-term liabilities. So in relation to this then, it's very important that you consider the cash flow budgeting side of things. You need to make sure that if you see any negative cash flows, if there are expectations of any negative cash flows, then there must be a plan in place to address these issues, and so you might be asked to recommend some financing options to resolve them. And then if we look at the gearing ratios, we can see that debt funding is quite high, standing at 66.43%, or 39.91% if you use the alternative form of gearing. This is generally considered quite a high gearing ratio. There isn't a lot of debt capacity left, depending on what the target gearing is for Prybloxx, but it does have a considerable number of assets on the balance sheet. It currently has 1.163 billion $, in property, plant, and equipment that it could use as security against which it could use to raise debt if it was needed. Then as for some of the relevant theories you might like to apply in the exam, you should make sure you understand the advantages of debt versus equity. With debt, you have quick access to new funds rather. You can raise finance at a low cost, and debt is generally a lower cost form of funding. And then as for equity, well, you don't have to make any interest payments, do you? A dividend to your shareholders, or at least an ordinary dividend, is completely optional. If we look at the consolidated statement of changes in equity in the pre-scene, we can see that a massive proportion of Prybloxx's after-tax profits goes to shareholders as a dividend. So maybe if it needs to raise finance, it cuts back on the amount of a dividend that it pays to shareholders. And then because any form of finance will affect different stakeholders in different ways, whether it be the lenders or your shareholders, you could use Mendelau's matrix as a way of mapping the position of lenders and your shareholders to figure out which ones you need to satisfy and which ones you need to keep close. Now, while I've got your attention at the end of this video, I'd like to make you aware of the other products that Astranti sell as part of the case study course. So the first of these is a series of study text and tuition videos, and these come in two flavors. You have our written study text if you prefer learning through reading, or you can watch our videos if you're more of a visual learner. Now to start with, we have an exam technique study series, which breaks down how to succeed at various case study levels. We'll be looking at exam technique, writing style, and planning that you need to nail to be successful in your case study exams. And to accompany this, we also have a revision series dedicated to the theory side of things. This is because at the case study level, there is a large amount of theory you need to be capable of using in your case study exam. So what we've done here is we've taken the key areas of the theory from the 3 case study levels and condensed them into a series of chapters to help focus your revision. Moving away from the more generic products and onto the products that are specific to the case study pre-scene, the first of these is the pre-scene analysis video series. First and foremost, this contains a series of videos where we break down the relevant pre-scene at the appropriate level of the qualification, page by page. And throughout this video, we bring out all the key points that could be relevant for you in your exam, looking at various topics and things you might need to consider when revising for the case study. And then to supplement the pre-scene analysis, we also have 2 videos. We have the strategic analysis where we give a broad overview of what kind of strategy the pre-scene company is using and where it might be going in the future. And then we also look at the top 10 issues that we think this pre-scene company might be subject to and something that you may need to take into consideration when revising for the case study. We then provide an industry analysis document and accompanying video. CIMA like to see you demonstrate wider industry knowledge in your exam, and this is what this industry analysis does, as it gives you the wider industry knowledge you need in order to fulfill this requirement. Essentially what it is, it's a large document that we've compiled on all the relevant industry information that we have gathered so that you don't have to do the revision yourself. And then to accompany this, we of course have a video that goes over this document to pick out some of the key points for you if you prefer that. We also produce a number of mock exams for every sitting. We write 5 mock exams for the first exam sitting, and then we add 2 more supplementary mocks for the second exam sitting. We design these mocks around the specific issues relevant to the pre-scene and make them as close to the real thing as you will see in the case study exam as possible. So these are a great way to practice your exam technique and test your knowledge of the pre-scene company under timed conditions. And then to add value to this product, we also offer a marking and feedback service. So we have a range of highly skilled finance professionals working as freelance staff for us, and it is these staff that provide the marking and feedback service. So this is a great service to use in conjunction with our mock exams, as it gives you a great idea of how you're progressing in the areas you need to work on for your case study exam. And then if you're in need of extra exam practice, we also provide a more generic question pack product. So obviously there are only so many questions you could write about on a specific pre-scene. So what this question pack is a series of generic questions on generic scenarios that we come up with at Astranti, whereby we look to test specific topics that come up regularly in the case study exam. So if there is a particular topic you are struggling with and we've only tested once in our mocks, and you'd like more practice on it, then these question packs will be a great product for you to turn to. The penultimate product on this list is a product for those of you who would like to get a full overriding picture in terms of your revision all at once, and these are our masterclasses. So these are our expert tutors who hold 2 masterclasses every exam sitting, and these essentially cover all key aspects that you're going to need to know for your relevant exams. So from particular theories to analyses of the pre-scene, all the way through to tips and tricks you can use in your exam. And finally, such is the confidence we have in the quality of our product that if you do purchase a full course from us and you unfortunately do not pass your exam using our product, then we will offer what we call a pass guarantee. So if you did not pass your exam after purchasing our full course, then you will receive the materials for the next exam sitting free of charge. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. I hope you find our products useful, and of course I would like to wish you the best of luck in your exam from everyone at Astranti.